Hi everyone, hope all of you are doing well. I am Tapas Chakraborty, FCMA, and on behalf of DM Tutorial, I welcome all of you to this episode of my series of tutorial videos. Today's episode is on a very important chapter of macroeconomics, that is consumers' behavior and consumers' equilibrium. As you all know, the theory of demand is based on certain laws, assumptions, ideas, concepts, and interpretation. And theory of demand underpins many other complex theories of advanced microeconomic topics. On the other hand, the consumer's behavior and consumer's equilibrium and the analysis of these things goes a long way in understanding the explanations given in analysis of theory of demand. Today's topic is Law of Equimarginal utility. As Marshall has defined the law of equimarginal utility, a consumer spends his income between commodities in such a way that the marginal utility of 1 unit of money derived from consuming one good is exactly same as the marginal utility of 1 unit of money spent on other goods. So this is the basis of law of equimarginal utility. Before we go into the depth of law of equimarginal utility, it is imperative to understand what is utility, what is total utility, and what is marginal utility. Now, utility can be derived from consuming a commodity or availing a service. The satisfaction a consumer gets from consuming a commodity is called utility of that commodity. Total utility is a sum of all the utilities derived by the consumer by consuming each units in the total number of units that the consumer consumes. And what is marginal utility? Marginal utility is change in total utility divided by change in quantity consumed. And what is marginal utility? Marginal utility is the additional utility that a consumer derives by consuming one additional unit. So change in total utility divided by change in quantity is the utility the consumer derives by consuming one additional unit. Now, total utility goes on rising so long as marginal utility is positive. It reaches the peak, that is the maximum point, and then it comes down. So total utility curve is upward rising. It reaches its maximum point, then it comes down. On the other hand, marginal utility curve is a downward sloping curve. Why? Because marginal utility of consuming one additional unit goes on falling as the consumer goes on consuming a particular commodity. Now, I will show how the total utility curve and marginal utility curve can be derived and how they relate to each other and to the output. On the x-axis, On the x-axis we measure quantity, and on the y-axis we measure total utility and marginal utility. When the consumer does not consume anything, the total utility is zero. So the total utility curve starts from origin. This is total utility curve. It starts from origin, it goes on rising, reaches the maximum point and then comes down. The marginal utility curve is a downward sloping curve, and it becomes zero when the total utility curve is maximum, and when the total utility curve starts falling, marginal utility becomes negative. Now, why this happens? This happens till this point. Marginal utility is positive. You can see till this point, if we mark it as M and this is N, then N is the maximum total utility. This is the maximum length that can be drawn between this line and this line. This is the maximum total utility. Here you can see that marginal utility becomes zero. So when total utility is maximum, marginal utility becomes zero. Beyond point M, total utility curve comes down, and beyond point N, marginal utility becomes negative. Now, why marginal utility can be negative? When a consumer goes on consuming more and more of a commodity, the marginal utility derived from the additional unit falls down, and a point will come when the consumer gets no further utility by consuming one additional unit of that commodity. And if he or she goes on further consuming that commodity, the utility derived from that additional unit becomes zero, becomes negative. So marginal utility curve is downward sloping and total utility curve is upward rising, reaches its maximum and then comes down. Now, the law of equimarginal utility depends on certain assumptions. That is, certain assumptions are made in explaining the law of equimarginal utility. What are those assumptions? Number one, it is assumed that the consumer is rational. That is, the consumer behaves rationally. Consumer prefers more to less. That means 3 chocolates are always preferred to 2 chocolates. Number 2, utilities of different commodities are independent. That is, the utility derived from commodity X in no way depends upon the utility derived from commodity Y, or for that matter any other commodity. Number 3, it is assumed that marginal utility of money remains fixed. Although it can be argued that marginal utility of money cannot remain fixed. For some people, acquisition of more money means more purchasing power and fulfillment of new desires. So for those people, marginal utility of money never falls. Instead, as the person goes on acquiring more and more money, marginal utility of additional unit of money for him increases. But for simplicity, we are assuming, as Marshall has assumed, that marginal utility of money remains constant, so that this theory can be fully explained. Next assumption is the law of equimarginal utility fully depends upon the law of diminishing marginal utility, as we have explained right now. Now, I will discuss law of equimarginal utility for a single commodity and law of equimarginal utility for more than one commodities. When we're talking about consuming a particular commodity, the consumer reaches equilibrium when the additional unit of money spent on that commodity becomes equal to price of that commodity. Although it can be argued that how marginal utility of a commodity can be equal to price, while marginal utility cannot be quantified, that is it is an ordinal measurement, there is no cardinal measurement of marginal utility or utility for that matter. But since utility cannot be quantified, the consumer purchases a commodity if he thinks the utility he derives from that commodity is equal to the price he is paying for that commodity. Now we can take an example where two persons are purchasing a chocolate of a particular brand and they are paying the same price, but there is no guarantee that these two persons will get exactly same satisfaction by consuming that chocolate. So MUX, that is marginal utility of X, may not be equal to price of X. Secondly, marginal utility, or for that matter utility derived from consume a commodity, can only be experienced or can only be felt when the commodity has actually been consumed by the consumer. So the consumer purchases a commodity expecting a certain amount, certain level of utility. The price which he or she is prepared to pay must match to the expectation of the utility. But after consuming that particular commodity, the consumer may find the utility he derives, that is the satisfaction he derives, does not match his expectation. So in that case, price cannot be equal to the marginal utility. Again, for simplicity and for making the theory plausible, we consider that MUX equals to PX, that is the marginal utility of X equals to price of X. Now Marshall has refined this theory and has overcome this problem by explaining in that way that the consumer will be in equilibrium, that is a rational consumer whose motive is to maximize his satisfaction by consuming either one commodity or more than one commodities. As we know, a seller, the motive of the seller is to maximize his profit. In the same way, the motive of a consumer is to maximize his satisfaction or utility. So he will, according to Marshall, he will spend his money on one commodity where marginal utility of that commodity divided by price of that commodity, that is the marginal utility of 1 unit of money spent on that commodity becomes equal to marginal utility of money at disposal of the consumer. Now this can be explained as follows. On the x-axis, we measure quantity, and on the y-axis, we measure marginal utility of x divided by price of x. Now, it is assumed that price of the commodity and income of the consumer are given. So, as the consumer goes on purchasing more and more of the commodity, marginal utility of x falls. As a result, mu x by px will also fall, and it will be a downward sloping line like this. This is mu x by px. Now, according to Marshall, mu x by px must be equal to MUM, that is marginal utility of money. And marginal utility of money has been assumed to remain constant. Suppose this is marginal utility of money. OM is the marginal utility of money. So we can see that MUX by PX line and the marginal utility of money line intersect at point, say, S. Here the consumer is consuming, say for example, OQ units of that output, of that product. So by consuming OQ units, the consumer's MUX by PX is exactly equal to the marginal utility of money, or OM. That is, QS is equal to QS becomes equal to OM. This is the equilibrium point of the consumer when he is consuming only one commodity. Now, in real world, no consumer consumes only one commodity. Rather, every consumer consumes more than one commodities. Some commodities are more important to a consumer relative to other commodities. This means the consumer attaches more significance to certain commodities relative to other commodities. But it is the fact that the consumer allocates his income or distributes his income between different commodities in such a way that the 1 unit of money spent on each commodity becomes equal to marginal utility of money of the consumer. So, in the law of Equimarginal utility, in case of more than one product, is explained with the following diagram. Again, on x-axis, quantity is measured, and on y-axis, marginal utility by price is measured. This is MUX by PX, this is MUY by PY, this is MUZ by PZ, where MUX equals to marginal utility of X Px equals to price of X, MUY equals to marginal utility of Y, Py equals to price of Y, MUZ equals to marginal utility of Z, and PZ equals to price of Z. And OM is the marginal utility of money. So we can see that the three curves, that is MUX by PX, MUY by PY, and MUZ by PZ, these three curves intersect this line at these points. Say the points are T, R, and S. So the consumer is consuming X1 units of commodity X, Y1 units of commodity Y, and Z1 units of commodity Z. By consuming OX1 units of commodity X, OY units of commodity Y, and OZ units of commodity Z, the consumer is maximizing his satisfaction. That is, he is capable of distributing or allocating his money at disposal in such a way that each unit of money spent on X, Y, and Z are equal to the marginal utility of money of the consumer. So this is the case of more than one commodities when law of equimarginal utility is applied, and we have already seen the case of one commodity. So let us call it a day. In the next video, we will discuss what are the limitations of this theory and how this theory can be overcome. As a matter of fact, has been overcome by more advanced technique, which is called indifference curve technique, developed by Hicks. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you concentrate on my lecture and whatever diagram I draw on this copy, I think you will be benefited while understanding complex topics of economics. So wait for the next episode on law of equimarginality, where I will discuss on the applicability and limitations of this theory. Thank you for watching this video.